Good evening. Welcome to Community and Technology. We connect the global community with news, information, resources. I'm Stu Reed, here with my co-host, Dave Burstein. Hey, Dave.
Hello.
How you doing?
I'm doing just fine.
Yeah,
I'm
well,
getting sick and tired of hearing Elon Musk and Twitter stories, but I guess we should cover the basics of that.
yeah, it's hard to ignore that guy. The world's richest man now has the world's biggest megaphone as well. So it's hard to ignore him. We're recording just a couple of days after the election, although won't be broadcast until a week following the election. But I think it's significant, just a number of things. One, he, in my mind, broke an unspoken rule by coming out and advocating for folks to vote Republicans in the general election. That was on Monday, I believe.
They weren't listening, were they?
Apparently not. Apparently not. But the unspoken rule, of course, is that the guys and corporations that own these huge platforms, i.e., Facebook, Google, Apple, etc., do not officially come out and endorse political candidates or political parties. But this guy, Musk, did. He came out and he advocated that folks vote Republican. And as you said, Dave, apparently a lot of folks were not listening.
Well, I happen to disagree with you on this one. Elon Musk made a political endorsement on his own Twitter feed, where
Okay.
he has something over 100 million subscribers. He would have done that even if he didn't own Twitter. And I don't think buying a company in media prevents you from having a political opinion and expressing it. We all do have opinions.
Okay.
Uh, and I have made a point on this show of 3 or 4 times when somebody ran that I knew was exceptional of making a recommendation. So I'm okay with Musk on that one. But I'm not okay with firing half the employees just like that
Mm-hmm.
for my sake. Not necessarily it's going to hurt the company, but it also means that the people they fired were all the folks keeping the pornography, anti-Semitism, racism, and other things off the site. People who protected Twitter's own system from hacks.
Yeah.
And he just lost the head of trust and safety, the head of the sales, and the person who, yes, the person who was his host on Twitter Space talking to advertisers.
Mm.
It's going to hurt the company.
Yeah.
Seriously.
Yeah, to your point, I just wanted to, a couple points that were mentioned recently in the Times. A couple independent groups, including Tufts University and Stanford University and University of Washington, since Musk's takeover of Twitter, have found, I'm quoting, more extremists and misinformation peddlers on the platform. And also a further quote, they found the presence and influence of misinformation on Twitter to be pervasive. This all just since his takeover. And as you said, he's gotten rid of, I think, some 13,000 employees, nearly half the employees, many of whom moderated the speech and the platform and kind of kept it within the bounds of sanity, at least.
And remember, Twitter has video too and pictures. On Facebook, somebody shot, 26 people in New Zealand and played it on Facebook Live.
Oh, really?
That can happen. Yeah, that was about 3 years ago. That can happen on Twitter as well. And the people who prevent things like that happening are almost all gone. But did you see that Jesus came back?
No. He returned?
Yes, he did. He They changed the rules for getting a check mark that says this is a verified account, so that you know if you look at Dave Burstein's account, it's really Dave Burstein.
Hmm.
And for $8 a month, you could choose any name you felt like and put it up. Jesus appeared.
Wow.
In addition to which, if they take down Jesus, he's sure to come back.
Wow, that's I don't know how that can how that can even be regulated, Dave. Impersonation of people. I mean, just because you give a check mark and a color code to someone, I mean, it's not clear to me that there is a way to technologically really ensure the authenticity of a given Twitter account holder. I mean, you tell me, Dave. I mean, it sounds good, but I mean, just the example you just raised, it sounds like it's already been made ludicrous.
Well, it's certainly possible to have a short phone call and be pretty sure who you're reaching. Uh, and I don't think they would have reached that Jew from uh, near Jerusalem. But this was just a joke. And they can't do things like the verification worth the darn, given that half the people there have been fired and a slew of the others are quitting. Musk today wanted to rile up his people to get them really working harder, and they all work very hard at a company like that, of 70 hours a week after the Musk takeover and to get things organized. But so Musk said, it's possible it could be so bad we might go bankrupt. You all have to work harder. Well, what would you do if you were an employee hearing your company might go bankrupt soon?
I start looking for another job.
And it's all over. It's on my Twitter feed, where many
Mm-hmm.
people at Twitter and at Facebook, which fired 13,000, are saying available for work. And the companies, all the tech companies who have had jobs open, and that's a lot, are trying to find a way to reach the ex-Twitter people.
Hmm.
Yeah. Now,
So, David, let me ask: do you think this is some financial maneuver, perhaps on his part? I mean, is there some benefit that he can maneuver and going through one of the bankruptcy proceedings and somehow come out stronger, leaner?
no,
Okay.
he could come out leaner. That Twitter doesn't have that level of debt. We would get rid of some of his personal debt,
Hmm.
but a company coming out of bankruptcy is going to be limited. So he might come out in control and wealthy from it. As far as I'm concerned, 1 billion is wealthy, but it would be really implausible that he'd recover 44 billion. Last thing, in Korea, he may not get away with this. He laid off workers in Korea, same thing, but Korea has a law that you can't lay off people without cause and notice.
Hmm.
And the Korea Herald suggested that if the employees went to court, they would be reinstated because of Korea's law. There's
Wow.
similar in France. I don't know the details in either case. There's a good reason to make it hard to fire people.
Hmm.
The US allows you to fire people for arbitrary and ridiculous reasons. From they came in late 3 times to they weren't willing to go along with your advances.
Hmm.
And employees deserve not complete lifetime jobs, although that system worked really well in Japan for 50 years, but some protection. Next story, please. I'm sick of hearing about Musk.
Well, as we leave it, I just wanted to contrast as we move over maybe to talk for a minute about Facebook, that they have terminated a whole bunch of people in a very different way, where they provided notice, they're providing severance pay, they're still honoring certain stock options. So it looks as though my reading of Zuckerberg's downsizing a lot more humane and progressive in terms of taking care of his people. Did you have the same take on that?
I noticed there was relatively generous severance. That's a good thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but he wasn't required to do so by law.
Right. Well, I'm just
So that,
11,000 jobs. And that's almost as many as at the other guy with the Musk guy. He
it's
cut
actually more
11,000
than
jobs.
Twitter. Yeah,
Yeah.
and it's getting rough at these tech companies. What happens when you're Mark Zuckerberg or Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos, when you make billions of dollars and are incredibly successful, worked really hard, and were a smart guy in the first place? But there are 10,000 smart guys in tech, maybe 100,000. And the three people who did so well, they worked hard, they're intelligent, they're worth listening to, but they're not effing geniuses. And that's what they almost all think because they did so well. And they lose the judgment. In
Mm-hmm.
Zuckerberg's case, I know he surrounded himself with people who were very like him, who were almost all white males. I had a picture of his in a crowd, and I think there was one woman and one Indian. I don't know who's fixed that. That was about 3 years ago. There was another tech company really hurting, which was Amazon. Amazon lost literally $1 trillion in stock market value in the last few weeks.
Wow.
It had a bad quarter and reported it was going to have more bad quarters. That doesn't mean Amazon's stock price, which is still about $1 trillion, just not 2 trillion, isn't perfectly appropriate for what the company actually is worth.
Mm-hmm.
And it just as easy as you can say, well, it went down because it was ridiculous because people overpaid for tech stocks. And that's something that probably is true.
Mm-hmm. I was amazed, kind of related to that. I know we mentioned it last week that Facebook has lost 70% of its value on the stock market. Pardon me, but then I'm reading a story that says in 2023, they expect it to spend 94 to $100 billion in expenses.
On what? I didn't hear that. Spending the money on what?
In expenses, they lost 70% of their value, but they still got so much cash coming in. They're going to spend 94 to $100 billion in expenses next year. I mean, that's an awful lot of money to be expending. That's huge. $100 billion.
And if it was a smart, and some of that is just the operating cost of Facebook.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know how many tens of thousands of people they have trying to block hate speech and racism and pornography? Literally tens of thousands of people in something like 76 languages.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't run Facebook without the government stepping in if you didn't do that. And a lot of governments want to step in.
Mm-hmm.
He did spend $10 billion on the metaverse, most of it creating the software to do it. Almost everybody thinks that that's a bad bet, that the returns in the metaverse are so far away and probably so limited that spending that kind of money doesn't make sense. Facebook is committed to having an open system and allowing competition in the metaverse. And when we're talking about competition there, We're talking about, of course, Google, Twitter, and other American companies, Samsung and Korea Telecom, the huge Chinese carriers, Reliance Jio, who has more subscribers to their mobile system than the US has people. There are over 400 million, all of whom think that it might be a metaverse. They should be very active in it. So unless he goes back on his commitment to make it practical for competition, there's no way he's going to make money. In addition to which, I had a very disappointing morning about 2 weeks ago at the Brooklyn 6G conference, which is a very fine wireless conference. There was a session on the metaverse.
Mm-hmm.
It had speakers from Intel and Microsoft, and I forget who the third was. They all had these incredible dreams of how the near instantaneous connection over the metaverse is going to change the world. It won't, at least for the next 10 years. Because I happen to know how they're building the phone networks and the internet networks. And they're bringing the connection time down to 20, 30 milliseconds on average. But the things that they were describing as instant, they said required much less than that. In fact, the CEO of Nokia was there, who said you need to get under a millisecond latency. And I can guarantee you there's no major phone company or internet provider in the world who's going to be doing that in the next few years.
Break that down for us, Dave, for the average listener who may not know what latency is and why it matters when we're talking about the metaverse. What are you talking about there?
Okay, you got the goggles on your eyes.
Yeah.
They're close to their eyes, and to be any good, they're refreshing 60 to 120 times a second. Yes, a second at high resolution.
Mm-hmm.
That means you have to get a lot of data there, and you got to get it fast. And then the new headsets are designed that if you move your head to the side or up or down, they track you and they give you what you would be seeing in the metaverse if you moved. But to do that, you have to go out to the server somewhere out on the internet, and that takes time. For most purposes, it doesn't matter whether there's 20 or even 100 thousandths of a second in delay. But for virtual reality, that less than 20 milliseconds is absolutely required, and many people get sick. And I've gotten sick on my stomach when I tried an early VR rig, if it's not down to 10 milliseconds. And neither Verizon, nor China Mobile, nor Korea Telecom, nor Deutsche Telekom, all of whom are pushing virtual reality and saying they're going to be delivering it, is going to get under 20 seconds on average anytime soon. It would take them many billions of dollars and many years to build a network that could do that. It's technically possible. You can do it in a lab. The Nokia guy, I'm sure, could show it to me if he wanted to, because that is what his people were doing in the lab. And Nokia inherited Bell Labs when they took over Alcatel, which had taken over Lucent.
Wait, Nokia has Bell Labs, Dave?
Bell Labs went to Lucent, AT&T's manufacturing outfit.
Mm-hmm.
Lucent did fabulously before the last break. They were worth well over $100 billion, which in that time was real money.
Mm-hmm.
And it all plummeted because they were actually losing money and had no way to make money. And they finally had to sell the 5 corporate jets and their golf course, and ultimately sold the company to Alcatel in France.
Mm-hmm.
and Alcatel was struggling, so they sold to Nokia. So yes, Nokia owns Bell Labs.
Wow.
There's still a load of engineers in New Jersey who include Marconi Prize winners and some of the best engineers in the world. And for 30 years, anybody who had talent that could go to science and engineering in Finland wanted to work for Nokia.
Mm-hmm.
That was the one high-tech outfit. And so they had got fabulous engineers coming from Finland. Alcatel had some fabulous engineers in France and Belgium. I knew a lot of them. They were the first to deliver DSL in the world in any volume, for example.
Mm-hmm.
So, yes, they have lots of good engineers in Nokia. And let me break a story here on the radio. I haven't written this up yet. I got a chance to talk to the CEO of Nokia and listen to the CTO of AT&T. He was very impressed by the next flavor of 5G, which is called distributed massive MIMO, that Nokia was demonstrating for him in his own facility 3 weeks ago. And he talked about the potential of that, of raising the upstream speeds 60 to 90%.
Mm.
Now, that's still a lab demonstration. Huawei has the same, and ZTE has the same, doing what essentially demonstration projects. They're probably a little ahead. They have actual users on them. But by distributing a lot of the small antennas, which is what MIMO is, around and possibly multiple cells, you can, with good central coordination, coordinate all the signals so that it's the best for what's actually going on right now. And there's a very different traffic demand when you're Manhattan and office buildings at 8 p.m. or 3 p.m. And with distributed massive MIMO, you can rearrange your network literally in milliseconds. It's very hard to do the level of calculations that takes. It's only now that we're getting enough computing power to make it practical. But that is the gleam in the eye of the chief technology officer of AT&T and many other engineers I know. It hasn't been.
What was the impact, Dave? What's the practical impact of that technological advancement for the technology for a consumer?
On one hand, none, because you're not necessarily going to have the peaks, but the average rate will go up enormously. And that's especially important where you have big crowds like stadia.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So it just gives more capacity to the phone company, which ultimately means they can give more to you. But remember, 5G doesn't do anything of interest, literally.
Mm-hmm.
It's an emperor without clothes.
Okay, we're going to take a brief break here. When we come back, I want to talk a little bit about tech education and technology in education. You've got a couple items that you brought to my attention that I want to kick around. So this is WHCR 90.3 FM. You're listening to Community and Technology with Dave Burstein and Stu Reed. Stay tuned. We'll be right back after a brief musical break. Okay, we're back. Community and Technology, Dave Burstein, Stu Reed. Before the break, we were talking about some of the tech giants, but I want to bring it back to everyday folks and talk about a little bit about technology and education. Dave, you just found a story about the impact or lack thereof of technology in the classroom. What'd you find?
This actually isn't news. We've known it from substantial studies 10 years ago, but nobody wants to admit it. 9 out of 10 people in policy, engineering, and probably an audience think it's a darn good thing to have computers in the schools. Enormously important. New York City alone has spent hundreds of millions. The feds are currently spending billions every year to get more computers into the schools. It doesn't have any observable result on how well kids do in reading, writing, and arithmetic.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's kind of
Computers
stunning.
are useful. Well, computers are useful, they're good, and they help teachers, but they're so much less important than things like the quality of the teachers in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
And how the parents cooperate in kids' education. Putting a computer in there, probably for 1 in 20 people, my guess, could make a big difference in what they achieve. One of my roommates in college, Bill Geisler, came out of the projects in Boston. And his school was awful, as it often is in poor neighborhoods. He found some early computer education stuff, the Plato system, when he was in high school, and taught himself enough that he got admitted to Columbia. It's certainly somebody who has that kind of motivation and that kind of ability may, in fact, have a dramatic result. But for most people, it's not clear it does more for people than taking them to a museum, having music played and explained, and having, for example, special coaches for kids who are dyslexic. There's lots of reasons why education isn't what it should be. And anybody who thinks computers is going to be a big change just doesn't know what they're talking about.
Mhm.
And I don't care if they're the chairman of the FCC or the chancellor of the schools of New York. Computers are fine, but they're not a miracle cure.
Mhm. They're just a tool at the end of the day. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, now I want to segue from that, Dave, to talk about a recent study that just came out about CUNY, City University of New York, and they've more than doubled the number of students who earn degrees in technology since 2011 to 4,000 a year, but they're not able to find work in the technology sector. Yeah, what do you think is going on with that? A year after the graduation, according to this report, half of the CUNY computer science graduates are not able to find work in their field.
The president of the United States has talked about how important it is to get more technically trained people. One of the things, China is pulling ahead of the United States in some fields. We're still ahead in most, but I can give you a half dozen where China is ahead, including quantum computing. Is because they think the economy needs technically trained people, whether it be computer scientists or bridge builders.
Mm.
And we know that the best train system in the world is in China. They have super fast trains, now even going to Tibet in the mountains. They've covered most of the major cities in the country. If the United States has one building in California, and it's not clear they're ever going to be able to finish it. They're in the tens of billions already, and they've only built a small part of it. So most of us think it would be good to get more technical people. We on the show have talked about how important STEM education is. What was the last show we did, Stu? From the Brooklyn people. It was a training program that brought girls.
Oh, yes. The Octavia Project. Excuse me, the Octavia Project, using fiction and creative thought to help women in technology, which was a really exciting project. The Octavia Project, named for Octavia Butler, science fiction writer. But it's a very small program, and just a handful of students and graduates.
And I would bet if Octavia was expanded to all the schools in Brooklyn, it would do nothing significant, nothing that would improve reading and writing for 9 out of 10 students.
Why is that, Dave? What's your take on that? Why is that? I mean,
because most people who are into it are already using computers. They're called cell phones. And there are a surprising number of actual computers in the projects. I saw one number, I don't know if it's reliable, that half families with kids in the projects had broadband and hence computers. because it's been really important to a lot of parents to get their kids that because they think it'll help the kids. Adding a super program for it, which the Octavia Project is probably wonderful for the kids who find the Octavia program and go to it and were recommended in the first place because they had aptitude. But unless you really want to achieve and have some skill, putting you on a computer is not likely to make a big difference in what you get out. Remember, the main use of computers in this world is making social connections. If we weren't on the radio, I'd put that most graphically. Facebook gets 1.6 billion people a day, something like that. People get news, but it's clear from the results of American elections that facts and news play only a small role.
But what's going on with the education system, though, Dave? You know, back to the CUNY story, where you have all these graduates in technology that can't find work in technology. What's going on there? There's a disconnect between
pure
industry
racism.
and schools, or what?
That's pure racism, and I couldn't prove it because there's no study, but I'm sure I'm right. The reason being that all the tech companies until a year ago were hiring like mad. They're still complaining they can't get people. The head of Charter, who's wanting to expand his network, cable and fiber, told his investors that he can't go very fast because they can't find the people they need. There's loads and loads of demand. And the fact these kids are not getting courses, are not getting jobs, partly is that the schools don't have what was available to you and me because we went to a fancy school. Guidance counselors and employment officers that connect to every large company in the city. Columbia very consciously has a huge program where they have Columbia graduates at a company help and mentor students who might want to work at that company. That kind of thing seems to help. It gives you a connection. Very few CUNY students have connections. Very few of them have the style that could get you a job at Google. Google still looks for you to be googly to hire you. They go through a huge process, often 3-4 interviews, to figure out whether somebody is a fit. The result is they hire people like the people they have now. And their first group of people, Sergey Brin, were Stanford PhDs.
White men.
The people they hired were very much like them. That it was overwhelmingly, I was just looking at a group of Facebook people. It happened to be their lobbyist group, and I was using LinkedIn to identify how many they had. And 3/4 or more of them came out of prestigious universities. Not because Google has a policy against hiring somebody from City College, but because it's implicitly been trying to hire people like the ones who succeeded there already. People at every level. We talk about a truck driving group. Hire people like themselves unless they deliberately do something else. We call that affirmative action sometimes. There isn't really that much of it out there. And given the job market and technology, I cannot find any explanation for the data the Times put that City College engineers and computer science graduates are not getting jobs, and that City College doesn't have the resources to help them, and that most employers, probably not knowing it, probably not in their personal life, make decisions that by and large exclude many people who are different from them.
Yeah, and just footnote, I'm sure most of our listeners probably know that the vast majority of CUNY students are Black, brown, and Latino. Not the white men that you see getting the graduate degrees from Stanford and the elite colleges that seem to predominate in the tech industry.
I had a chance to talk 2 weeks ago to a guy who went to City College. His name is Len Kreinrock. He's a UCLA professor, very prestigious. Just got the Marconi Award, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. He connected the first mobile phone. But he was a poor kid growing up in the Bronx. He couldn't even go to the regular classes at City College. He had to help support his family and had to work in the day, and he went to the night school.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Len was outstanding. He stood out. As I said, getting access will help some, but not the average person. Got his PhD under Claude Shannon at MIT and became one of the most distinguished engineers in the world. And he said he'd come on the show when I told him we do this from City College. I just sent the invitation out to him.
Oh, great. Okay.
But that is who always was the people who go to the school that was free or almost free. It was the people who didn't have the money to go to something fancier.
Mm-hmm.
City College has always been excellent. It got 8 Nobel Prizes to its graduates. Well, that was a long time ago. And Len had heard that it wasn't the same. Well, we've been in City College. It's still a very good school. You can still get a fine education there, but it's not as much fun. It doesn't have the sports teams, the fraternities, the prestigious visitors coming to campus 3 times a week. When I was studying economics at Columbia, I was working on the economics in the US under JFK. Well, I had a long talk with somebody who came to lecture at Columbia, Jim Tobin, who had been the chief of the Council of Economic Advisors under JFK. That certainly helped me get better. But you learn the same economics at City College that you learn at Columbia. And so, no, the kids coming out of City College have always been known to be good and work hard. You don't go to City College unless you're willing to work hard. Most people have jobs, often full-time.
Mm-hmm. But clearly, they don't have the corporate connections. They don't have the mentorships and the internships. And they don't look like the folks that are getting the predominant jobs in the tech sector. So I mean, it to me it's a big problem if you got half the graduates in technology not able to find work in the sector. That just doesn't make sense, especially given how the sector has been booming of late.
There have been heavy-duty layoffs at Twitter, Facebook, Amazon. Google is on a hiring freeze. So is Amazon.
Sure.
So there's been some very well publicized problems, but there's still a big shortage of technically trained people. It's still a field where if you have training, a degree, you almost always can get a substantial job. And if you're not, there's a reason. And the poor guidance and employment services and internship arrangements that City College doesn't have is certainly part of it. Other than that, I can't think of any other reason other than the often unconscious prejudice of the people doing the hiring.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that can be overcome. Traditionally, well, actually, this was true. Back in my mother's day, if you were Jewish, and there was prejudice against Jews then that was much stronger than it is today, you wanted to go to work for the phone companies or for IBM. Why? Because the phone companies, needing to recruit so many people, went out of their way to find people and to get career possibilities. And in fact, I can tell you that the phone companies have raised a pile of people up, people of color. A friend of mine was Ralph de la Vega. He came from Cuba when he was 8 years old. He worked his way through college as a janitor. He would never have been hired at a place like Google or Facebook. 40 years later, when he was giving a prestigious speech, he still had a heavy accent. He made it to the number 3 position in a 200,000 person company, AT&T. And he was the one who personally negotiated with Steve Jobs and brought the Apple to AT&T before it got to any other company.
Wow.
Well, that's what you do when you're at the top of AT&T.
Mm-hmm.
And I've seen that story a lot of times. It really surprised me. When we first got into, it was when I first got into radio, or in my previous radio, BAI. Jesse Jackson came to New York to talk to a Black employee organization at Verizon. And since I wanted to hear Jesse Jackson, I arranged to go to it too. And it was packed. And except for me and a handful of others, it was all Verizon employees. Because Verizon has, for many years, decided that if they get a bigger pool of possible employees and they're open to people that others are prejudiced against, they're going to get better workers.
Mm-hmm.
And that's true in general. It's true at Google. It's true that Google has lost that, even though Google at the top has been trying to change that. When looking at discrimination against women, and anything I go to in technology, it's 9 out of 10 men. US, France, Israel, China, at any substantial job. So Google knew this, and they said, we want to hire more women. They literally reached out and generally made job offers to every woman who got a PhD in computer science or electrical engineering in 20 years.
Wow.
No, that's the kind of thing you have to do to overcome the systematic prejudices, and it didn't work very well.
No?
Now,
What happened?
well, I know that not that many women in top jobs at Google.
Okay.
There's a few.
Uh-huh. That sounds like a fake move. Okay.
No, it was a genuine move. It just wasn't, you had to do even more to make it work. You had to change people's attitudes of working there.
Yeah, yeah.
We had a lot of people leaving Google lately because the sexual politics inside Google were getting ugly. Which one is this? Yes, it was Google, who in 2 years fired 46 managers for improper sexual approaches to their employees. And we knew that culture, the bro culture, and you have to really look, and that has discouraged a lot of women from going to engineering. We're both in the Internet Society. A few years back, the Internet Society had a small meeting. The Internet Society had a lot of nerds. Many of them have few social graces. It was even more true then. The guy who was the president then was somebody who concentrated on his engineering work, not his social work. So at one small event, we had maybe 20 people, and there were 2 women. And all the guys hit on those women. And most of them didn't know how to do it very well. As I say, this was a very nerdish crowd. And well, you can take advantage of that sometimes. I was president of the New York Amateur Computer Club a long time ago. And that was 80, 90% male. But there was one woman there who really intrigued me. In fact, I went out with her once on the kind of date that most people wouldn't think of. We volunteered in a soup kitchen in Westchester, Yonkers. And that was what she wanted to do. So she was somebody who was interested somewhat, and I was definitely interested in her. So after a meeting, I asked her to go for a coffee with me, and I apologized. This is before we went out. I apologized to her that I asked her, and I asked her because she's smart in computers and interesting. I wasn't just hitting on her. And she said, Dave, don't you realize why I come to these meetings? They're all guys. But that's not usually the experience.
Yeah, that's not typical. That's not typical. Yeah. Okay, well, we're about out of time here, David. Any closing thoughts before we sign off? You know, one thing I just wanted to mention. Go ahead.
A lot of things have changed during my lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
When we were born, Jenny and I, Jenny's Black, would not even be allowed to marry in some states. I had a friend who was a person of color who drove through the United States, cross country, and literally had a shotgun blast through the window of the car they were driving in. Now, this fellow went on to be a Columbia professor, happened to be the son of the Pakistani ambassador to Canada, and he was a really good guy. We shared a car going to an economics event in Toronto. There were about 6 of us in the car. 5 of us got through customs without being bothered. Anu was stuck at customs for 6 hours, even though he could show the customs people the brochure from the conference, which had him as a speaker. Now, and we know how hard it was to find a water fountain in much of the South if your skin was their own color. There's still a lot of problems. We started this bit talking about how City College graduates in engineering are not getting the kinds of jobs that they trained for in a market that they should have been grabbed up. And we don't have to talk about the problems in politics. We all know what's going on.
Yeah. Okay, Dave. I think we are pressing the limits of our time here. More to be discussed here on community and technology. Thanks for tuning in, folks. This is a WHCR 90.3 FM. Every Wednesday, 5 to 6 p.m. Community and technology. Stay tuned. You just might learn something. Thanks. Good night.